So over the last couple of months, I've received a lot of private messages and emails and such from people asking me for tips or advice because they're trying to get into creating content or they're trying to get into commentary and they want to get an idea about some of the things that I do to create my content, how I do research, how I prepare for events as a commentator, as an analyst. And through all of these comments and questions, one of the things I felt that could maybe be the most helpful was just talking about building your knowledge in CSGO. Because to me, there are so many different things you can study within the game, and there's so much you can do with that information, whether you want to get to commentary, whether you want to get into vlogging or doing interviews or doing podcast or doing writing. There's just so many different outlets. There's so many different ways to express yourself, but one of the common things to all of them is having good knowledge in the game. And granted, certain roles focus on certain topics more than others, and people develop certain specialties where they are experts on certain aspects of the game, but maybe aren't as familiar with other aspects of the game. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but the basic gist of this video is to talk about the different things you can study in CSGO, or at least what I could come up with off the top of my head, as well as the source materials you can use to get this information, and then give you some examples about how I put my notes together, and as well as some examples of what you can do once you have this information. So to start things off, let's talk about the things that you can study about CSGO. So first off, you can study the history of the game. This goes all the way back to, I believe, like mid 2012 or so, all the way up into the present. So if you wanted to do a study of the distant past, the origins of CSGO, you could certainly study that. You could study the more recent past if you wanted to, or you could just study the entirety of the game. Now, funny enough, this is actually one of the things I'm probably weakest on, even though I studied history in college, and that's mostly because early on in CSGO, I wasn't that deep into the game. I did play-by-play commentary, but I didn't really have a deeper understanding of the game. I didn't really start getting into doing heavy research until probably around the very beginning of 2015, maybe the very end of 2014, and I've kind of kept up with it since. So my knowledge of the distant past is actually pretty bad. I'm only really good with maybe the last year and a half or so, funny enough. But you certainly could, write some pieces about the history of the game or do some vlogs about the history of the game, or definitely having a knowledge of the history of the game can also help you develop storylines if you're doing analyst-esque work or commentary. This is obviously a big strength of Thorin's, not his only strength, of course, but certainly one of them, and he's one of the few people that do have such a deep understanding of the history of CSGO, not to mention his previous versions of the game as well. So this is certainly something that you could focus on. Now, there's lots of things within history as well. So when I start talking about these other topics you can study, these are obviously a part of the history of the game as well, right? Everything is a part of the history of the game. We make history every day. And so I guess history is kind of the umbrella, and then all these things kind of fall underneath it, so to speak. But you get my point, I hope. So another thing you can study comes to just studying teams and the players. So these types of topics would be studying a team's map pool. What maps are they good on? What maps are they bad on? The maps that they are good on, how do they approach those maps? What is their win rate on that map? How successful have they been on it when it comes to tournament play? What types of maps do they pick? What types of maps do they ban? These are all certain things that relate to a team's map pool, and having that information can be very useful depending on what type of content or what type of work you're trying to do. Obviously, studying results is another big thing. Usually a focus on the recent results. I would say you want to focus on what teams have been doing in the last 3 to 6 months to just get an idea about how they've been performing, but certainly you could study back teams and players' results all the way back to the origins of the game, depending on what you're working on, but certainly focusing on results is going to be important. And now, obviously, you need to add weight to certain results over others, so obviously LAN results are more important than online results, and certain LANs hold more prestige than others as well, so you have to kind of find a way to organize these results and figure out which ones hold more value than others. And that's probably a deeper discussion beyond that. But again, just the basic gist of it is just, focusing on LAN tournaments, focusing on majors, and just kind of, finding out the pecking order of the results and how, important they truly are. All of this kind of ties into studying a team and players' form. So, like, what form are they in? Have the results been good lately? Have they been in a slump? And this goes for individuals as well as entire teams. So just studying the form of them. Are the stars of the team still performing like stars? Or Have they been kind of falling off? You're kind of studying the rankings, basically, team rankings and player rankings, and just how they've been performing over a certain period of time. And you kind of set those parameters on what you want to look at as far as form overall for the entire year, form in the last 3 months. You kind of set that timetable. Then you can also study style and strategy of a team. So are they an aggressive team? Are they a more passive team? Are they a more default-oriented team? Are they more execute-heavy? Do they have a good mixture of all of these things? Are they very dynamic on their CT setups? Are they very stationary and passive? Are they quite mobile? Do they like to do these aggressive pushes? Is their opera very mobile, all over the place? Or does he have the tendency to kind of just stick in one spot and just kind of be a turret, or, only play certain positions? Or is he very flexible? You can really study a team's style and strategy, of course. Now, within this style, within this system that a team has put in place, you can study the roles of the different players on that team. So this is not just positions they play. So, for example, part of studying roles is studying, is this guy a lurker? Is he an opera? Is he an in-game leader? Is he an entry fragger? Is he more of a secondary entry fragger? What type of position does he play? What types of spots does he play on certain maps? Is he more of a peripheral role player on the edges of the map, which is where lurkers, I guess, would usually be? But sometimes you can see entry fraggers and peripheral roles depending on the execute that they're trying to look for. Do they kind of travel as part of the main pack that's trying to take map control? So, roles on CT side, are they site anchors? Are they more of a rotator? Do they move around a lot? And roles also can be, are they the star of the team? Are they the player that their team relies on the most to find kills? And obviously that can come from an entry fragger position, but it can also come from an opera, from a lurker. Is this the guy they count on to carry them, so to speak? Is this guy, one of the secondary stars of the team? Is he one of the other people on the team that you expect to do really well? Is this guy not usually expected to frag very well, but he plays another important role on the team as a support or as an in-game leader, a tactician? And this goes for coaches as well, by the way. Coaches are becoming increasingly more important in CSGO, where you have certain teams who have coaches who are now the primary shot caller for the team. And so certainly lopping coaches into this with players and their roles is also very important. Whereas some other teams have managers or coaches who are much more hands-off, maybe help with preparation or help in other ways as a support system for the team, but they don't really help with actually leading the team in games and their strategy and such. So put that in there as well. You'd also study the trends of a team, which I guess kind of relates to results, but also do things shift? Like, has this team changed over time as far as their approach to the game? Have they, developed a certain metagame that they like to follow? Maybe they used to be an execute-heavy team, but now they're more default-oriented, or maybe they used to be kind of a free-flowing team, and now they have more deeper tactics. You can kind of study the trend of a team, how things have changed over time. You can study player tendencies and team tendencies. Maybe, again, a particular player loves to play a particular spot on a particular map, and that's just his tendency to do that. Or maybe it's his tendency to take fights. Maybe it's tendency to actually back off and play smart and wait for teammates for a retake. You can kind of just study a player's style and tendencies and stuff like that. And then you can study specific executes, specific tactics. Maybe, you saw a team do a certain tactic on a bomb site that you haven't seen before. Maybe it's unique to them. Or maybe it's not completely unique. Maybe it is a common tactic, but they add their own twist to it, right? They add their own adjustments that make it kind of unique to them. And so this is part of studying a team style and strategy, but while a team style might be a passive one, you can study the specific setups and tactics that they use to implement that passive style. Or if they're aggressive, what aggressive executes do these guys have? How many flashes do they use? How many smokes do they use? How do they use Molotovs to enter into a bomb site? And this obviously works on the CT side as well. Do they like to do a lot of mid pushes to control middle on like Mirage or Cash or something like that? Or do they just like to play the bomb sites and play far back? These are all different things that you can think about. So these are just some of the things I thought off at the top of my head that you can study in the game. There's probably a bunch of more things that you could study in the game, but these are just some of the main things. The history, looking at teams, looking at their map pool, their results, their form, their style and strategy, the roles the players play on the team, whether that be positions or just how important they are to the team as a fragger or as a support, as well as studying specific tactics and tendencies and things like that. So these are just some of the things that you can study within the game. Again, there's probably more that you could add, but these are the ones that I came up with. Now, how do you get this information? How do you study this information? So to me, there's like primary sources and secondary sources. This is coming from the history field. So the primary sources are things that are just as closely related to the game as possible. They're from the primary source, the game itself, or the players or the teams competing in the game. So this is you kind of going out on your own and discovering like this really raw data that you then interpret yourself and you create your content with it. So primary source material would be demos, like actually watching the teams and players play and really studying them. Some of these topics I talked about, the things that you can study, you can use demos or watching match VODs or what have you to start studying team styles and strategies and tactics and things like that. So obviously demos, watching games, live VODs, that is certainly a source of material that you can use. I would say it's a primary source of material. Another primary source of material would probably be, listening to what players and coaches and managers and stuff like that say. So what they've said in interviews or maybe vlogs that they've created, or just anything that's from the mouth of a player or a coach or something like that, whether it be something that they've written or said in an interview or done their own content, or maybe even if you were just watching their stream and they said something about how they felt about something, then, if you were studying a particular player, you had that primary source like, oh, I heard that this is how he feels about something, and so I can reference that. So that would be something else. Studying statistics. So this goes into map pick bans, results, win rate, things like that, average damage per round, KD ratio, rating, all these types of things. And we've already had a lot of discussion about advancing statistics and finding more advanced stats we can look at, really find more complex metrics to measure things and describe things. But I'll just use the word stats in general then. And there's so many different types of stats you can study, and there's so many different places you can go to find this information. Obviously, HLTV.org is a very popular place, probably the most popular place, but there's probably other places you can find stats as well. So there's something else to think about. Other things you can do is news articles. So this is secondary source stuff. Now you're reading other people's content. They've gone and looked at the primary sources, the raw data, and they have now written about it. So these can be news pieces, like investigative stuff, but they can also be feature pieces, which are going to be more op-ed. So these are going to be the opinions of analysts, whether they be as a writer or as an analyst on a desk or what have you. You're looking at their content now. So articles, like written pieces, as well as vlogs like Thorin Thoughts or something like that. Or like I said, analysis from the mouth of an analyst or a caster at an event or at an online cup or what have you. So basically the point is you're going to study primary source material and you're going to form your own interpretations of that information. Granted, you need to keep those interpretations true to the data, and you can't sit here and try to find data just to confirm what you believe and ignore other data. It's about interpreting the data the correct way and then using that to kind of figure something out. And again, you have to be open-minded. You have to let the data lead you to a conclusion. You can't make your own conclusion, just find things to support that. So that's also really important. I could probably do a whole video about interpreting data, but that's just kind of a very general thing really quickly. So you can go out and find primary source material and interpret that and form opinions and form your thoughts or learn about someone. You're going to educate yourself about a team or a player and all these different topics that I've talked about by looking at primary source material. But you can also use secondary source material to help kind of mold your opinion even more. Maybe you feel a certain way, but now that you've seen someone else's interpretation, that leads you to be like, oh, okay, like maybe that is a possibility, or maybe I should kind of understand that and just kind of add that to my own understanding. I'm not saying that you should just completely believe anything someone else says, but maybe they make a valid point, and so it catches your attention and it allows you to just kind of mold your mindset. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you want to give credit to certain people if you're writing something, but as far as just forming your opinion, yeah, sure, definitely go out there. You also kind of kill two birds with one stone, because not only by looking at other people's content and secondary source material do you kind of mold your own understanding of things, but you also maybe learn how a particular person likes to write things. Maybe that influences your own style of writing, or maybe you hear a certain commentator commentate a certain way and that kind of influences your style of commentary. So you kind of can get a lot more benefits out of looking at secondary source material rather than just the raw information you get. It also helps you learn maybe a little bit more about your craft, whatever that may be, writing or doing commentary or what have you. So I think that it's extra beneficial to look at secondary source material for those reasons. And so I've already kind of mentioned what those can be, like I said, articles, vlogs, analysis, things like that. So that's just something to think about. Now, Someone asked me specifically about how I prepare for commentary and analysis. What types of things do I look at? What do my notes look like, so to speak? And so I can tell you that for every top international team, like that's in the top 10 in the world or something like that, but also since I do a lot of North American stuff for different online tournaments and leagues and things, I also have a document for all the North American teams as well, at least all the ones that compete in pro leagues. So I guess in general that means I probably have, let's see here, my CSGO notes folder right now has, sorry about this, I probably should have done this before, 7, 14, 21. I have about 30 documents, I guess, in my CSGO notes folder right now. Some of these aren't as updated as they need to be. Some of them are quite up to date, but you get my point. And so for each team, I'll go look at first I'll look at their map pool and their map statistics. And sometimes I filter this into two separate portions, one for online and one for LAN. And sometimes some of these teams, like for NA, for example, don't play in a lot of LAN, so all I have to go on is online results. And just look at all the maps, how many times they've played it, how many times they've won and lost. And then I also take note of like key wins and losses. So where did they beat some really big opponents? Did they get upset by some teams or something? How many times have they won or lost in a row? You know, where do their wins come from? Do they come from bigger tournaments or smaller tournaments? Also look at, you know, how many rounds are they getting from the CT side and the Terrace side. You have to be kind of careful with this because obviously they blew someone out in the water in the first half of a map, no matter what side they were on, whether it be CT or T. Then obviously they didn't even get to play that many rounds on the other side. So you have to be a little bit careful about looking at where most of their rounds come from on the T or CT side. But it's still good to like have a general idea about how successful they are on certain sides. But then you have to go into the demo review and see why are they actually successful there. Is it because they have cool tactics, or was it just because their dudes were on fire hitting a bunch of crazy shots? Like you have to do some deeper study there, but that's some general stuff. So I have every map listed and some notes for each map listed for online and LAN play as far as wins, pick bans, stuff like that goes. So I have a separate section on picks and bans, what have they been picking, what have they been banning, things like that, and then some general notes about maps. And then I have the recent results online and on LAN, who have they played, you know, what event were they at, what placing did they get, who did they play that were there, what maps did they play, what were the results. So basically this is just like a data dump of match results from HLTV basically. But again, I look at, you know, also rounds on each side of the map as well. And I just have all that listed. And then after I look at the recent results, then I have player notes. So for these, I just have all 5 players on the roster. I have notes about, you know, their rating, KD ratio, ADR, things like that over the past few events they've been playing at, and also just some little general notes like how their form is, you know, just from an eye test as well. And so I have that. And then after that, then I go into every map, and then every map has like 1 or 2 pages of notes, and I just look at their defaults, default player positions, specific tactics they like to use, some tendencies of the team, some style notes about how aggressive or passive they are. I do this for T side and CT side, and I have this for every map. And the way I get this information is by watching demos. Usually I'll take a team and I'll watch them play every map, and I try to do it on LAN. So usually I'm only using LAN demos, unless it's some team that's not been to LAN a lot, then I have to use online demos. Basically, I just watch them play every map at least 2 or 3 times to just get a general feel for what types of executes they have, what types of defaults they have, all that type of stuff, right? And then once I have done that research, which usually is I try to use as most recent stuff as possible over the past couple of months, and then once I've built that document, because some of these documents are very old, like things I built like, you know, months ago. Obviously, if a team's roster changes or something, I kind of start from scratch if it was like a really dramatic roster change. If they only swapped one player, if I'm watching that team with that new player and they're still doing a lot of the same things, they just kind of plugged a new player into the spot the old player had, then I'll just kind of leave what I had from however many months ago. But if they start kind of anew and I notice a drastic differences, then I'll just start a whole new document over and just get rid of what I had before. And I also, then at that point in the document, I started it 6 months ago, but I keep it updated. So every time they play another tournament, I'll go back and look at the demo and see if they've made any changes. Or if things have stayed pretty much the same, then I just kind of say, okay, they're still playing that way. No reason to make any updates. And usually I just go into a demo. I'm usually using the giant map overview a lot because I don't really need to see how kills actually happen from a first-person perspective. I generally just look at how they set up, how they respond to certain things, you know, how quickly do they move or how long do they wait, just general things like that. You know, really hard for me to go too in depth with that. I could probably just do a whole another thing about how I watch a demo and what I look for, but If that's something that interests you, maybe I could do that. But yeah, I just do a lot of a demo analysis, or if I can't find demos, match VODs, just whatever. And so that's kind of what I do for notes on every team. And so that's how I prepare for doing an analyst desk or doing color commentary or what have you, is just having a good understanding of the teams and players, how they approach the game, recent results. All these topics I mentioned before, I try to focus on. Now, again, I did mention earlier that you're going to specialize in certain things most likely, and Thorin talks about this in a video he did about caster knowledge, and I think he was using a lot of League of Legends examples in his video, but it still applies to CSGO in a big way. And this is an example of how I've used secondary source information to mold my interpretation or opinion about things, because I do watch a lot of Thorin stuff, and he has been a big influence on me. And he talks about in that video that you're going to specialize in certain things. So for Thorin, for example, he specializes in history, as well as he really likes the map pick band thing and teams map pools, and then he also has a general understanding of how all the teams play. He probably has a deeper understanding of a lot of teams as well. Maybe that he does know specific tactics, but he doesn't really use it as much because for his role it's not necessary. And of course results, form, and things like that. So he has probably a very good understanding of actually all the topics I mentioned, but he focuses a lot on history and map pool, map pick ban. That seems to be his thing. Someone like Yanko focuses a lot on tactics, a lot on strategy. That's probably the person I'm most similar to, because I think I spend most of my time, most of my research is spent watching demos, but I also keep up with obviously results and map pool and stuff as well. But I kind of tend to enjoy, because see, it's not just about specialize in something for the sake of it. It's because maybe that's what you enjoy, or maybe the way your mind works, that just seems to be a strength of yours as far as understanding it. So there might be different motivations or reasons why you would specialize in a certain thing, but generally people are going to key in on things that either interest them or that they're stronger at understanding. And it's also just about time, as Thorin mentions in the video as well. You don't have time to study everything. I don't have time to go back and study the entire history of the entire game from 2012 forward. So I just focus on the last 3 to 6 months, and I keep track of it. So when I started in 2015, I just started there, and I've just kept track since. And then I constantly update my notes by watching more demos and stuff like that. So yeah, also not just specializing, but also depending on what you're doing, what role you're playing, or what you're trying to do, you're also probably going to specialize or focus in on particular topics. So for example, if you're an analyst, and again, Thorin talks about this in his role of analysis desk video that he did on his YouTube. As an analyst, you focus, what he talks about is on primarily identification of a team and its players, which means you're going to bring up some history and some storylines. You're going to talk about recent results and form. You're going to talk about their map pool, their picks and bans. And you're going to talk a little bit about strategy. Like maybe you explain why they're so good on the map by talking about how they approach it. But you're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of their specific executes and tactics and stuff like that. Whereas if you're a color commentator, you don't have to worry so much about history and results and things like that, because that information has already been presented. So now you just focus on the now, and as a color commentator particularly, you're going to focus a lot on strategy and tactics throughout the game, what they use, what works, what doesn't. If you've done a lot of demo review, then as you're seeing a team set up, you might already know what they're setting up for because you've seen this before, and you can bring that information in. Or you can talk about, hey, we're in a tactical timeout. This is what we've seen them do so far. I know that they had this play in their playbook. They haven't used it yet. Based on the way the CTs are playing, I think this might actually work. Maybe you could see this. You can bring that in if you have that research done. And you could talk a little bit about roles and stuff like that as well. But again, roles might be an identification part on the analyst desk, as well as, positions that they play or something. I personally actually would like to see the analyst desk go into strategy a little bit more. But it's all about time, right? And you spend so much time doing identification, which is so important. But I've always talked about maybe having a giant map overview where you have the players' positions, like at least their default positions on T side and CT side, so you can talk about player matchups that are positionally based rather than just saying opper versus opper or entry versus entry. It'd be cool to talk about, I know this guy likes to play the long B platform, and this guy on the opposing team likes to play the B bomb site, so they're going to have a clash, and that's going to be a key battle on the map or something. I think that'd actually be really cool, positionally based player matchups. But I'm getting off topic a little bit here. Very sorry about that. Again, depending on what role you play, analyst or color commentator, you're going to focus on particular topics. As a writer, you have a ton more freedom. You can pretty much write about anything if you're a feature writer. You could write about some history if you wanted to. You could write about a team's map pool and why that makes them so good. You can write about a team's map picks and bans, and because they don't have a big enough map pool, they get screwed on that phase, and so that's why they can't go deep in tournaments. You can write about a team's results and how great they are, or how great they've been, or a particular player. Like I did some pieces on E-League for Coldzera, Mixwell, and then I did one about Mo and Dozia on Gambit, and so I was focusing on the players and their history and their results and their form over time and why they're so great, or why they still have, you know, room for improvement, or they still have things to prove, what have you. So I was focusing on those particular topics because that's what I was writing about. But you could write about particular, if you wanted to just do a study on a team's tactics, you could write about that. Although that would probably be easier to do in video form, so you could actually like show the clips of them running certain executes and highlighting things, I suppose. But you have a lot more freedom. Same with content creation. If you're just creating YouTube videos, you can go into any of these topics and you can use any of that source material I mentioned and try to come up with cool stuff. I think that you have to judge what you need to know, what you need to focus on, and how much you need to do to get a good understanding of that topic so that you can create quality content. That's kind of something that you have to decide. So I'll just leave it at that, I think. I think in this video, I just try to talk about the things that you can study in the game, the source materials you can use to get that information, give you an example of what I've done for research for teams for my work as an analyst and color commentator, because that's the roles that I prefer to play. And I've talked a little bit about the things that I prefer to study, but you may be completely different. Maybe there's other things you'd like to study more, and there's other things you'd like to do with it. And then I try to give you some examples about what you can do with it as a commentator, as an analyst, as a writer. Again, even if you just want to be an interviewer, I didn't mention that, I guess, but even if you want to do interviews, having understanding of player history about the player you're about to go talk to can help you have better questions, help you be a more informed interviewer. If you have a good grasp of what's going on, you can know what are the best questions to ask and how to phrase them to get the most information out of the person you're interviewing. So that was just another quick example to fire in there. But again, I just hope that this is helpful, or that you find this interesting, because again, I think that if you have a good grasp of these topics and you know how to do the research and you know how to get the information, you can express that information in so many different ways, whatever plays to your strengths, or whatever you prefer to do. I just wanted to give you some insight into that. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe for more. Thanks so much.